Tonight, we recap the election results of last night and analyze the significance of several states that had primaries or special elections yesterday. Also, Republican Congressman Chris Collins from New York has just been arrested and charged with insider trading. His seat in Western New York was once considered safe. Will it now be in play? Then a whole lot of legal news surrounding the president, Trump's attorneys trying to negotiate conditions for a possible interview with Bob Mueller, and the trial of former campaign manager Paul Manafort continues in Virginia. Former federal prosecutor joins us to hash it all out. And also, California dealing with the worst wildfires the state has ever seen. President Trump pouring fuel on those fires by actually criticizing how California and the governor are handling the crisis. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you for joining us this Wednesday. Last night, it was the final special election of the 2018 midterm cycle, the last election to Congress before the entire nation turns out to vote this November. And this morning, the race that many said was the one to watch remains too close to call. That despite the seat being in Republican hands since the 1980s. Despite Trump winning that district by double digits, and despite late, desperate visits from the president, the vice president, and a ton of outside money. All that said, it's still too close to call. So, what can the special election results tell us about the impending midterms that are now just 90 days away? Well, for that, we turn to senior political correspondent Andrew Whitman. Andrew.
Well, Rich, this was a fascinating race in a fascinating district in Ohio, combining suburban and rural areas together. Parts flushed with college-educated voters, other portions of the district featuring blue-collar voters, all in what was designed to be a safe Republican seat. It is not safe anymore. Republican Troy Balderson leading Democrat Danny O'Connor by just over 1,700 votes, with every precinct reporting. But there are more than 3,400 provisional ballots still to be counted, so this race remains too close to call. And as an aside, a Green Party candidate who got just under the number of votes that O'Connor trails by is throwing off the balance in this race. This special election, as Rich mentioned, the final one of the 2018 cycle. And in the 11 federal special elections we've seen in this cycle, Democrats have now improved on their 2016 performances by an average of 16 points per race. That is a strong indicator of a possible Democratic wave this November. It is also a very good sign for Democrats hoping to regain control of the House of Representatives this fall. Democrats need to pick up 23 seats to win control, or 22 if O'Connor is able to pull out a victory in Ohio. But Republicans are defending 24 seats considered toss-up races by the Cook Political Report, and 42 Republicans won their seats in 2016 by 16 points or less. That's 16 points. Again, that's the average swing we've seen for Democrats in special elections thus far. 2 of those Republicans are in our region, and if Democrats improve by 16 points or even by just 10 points in every district in our region, both New Jersey's Leonard Lance and the Hudson Valley's John Faso will be out of jobs come January. 2 other races of note yesterday, testing the influential powers of both President Trump as well as of Bernie Sanders and the rest of the progressive Democratic far left. In Kansas, the Trump-backed Chris Kobach is leading incumbent Republican Governor Jeff Colyer by just 191 votes in another race that's too close to call. Trump put himself on the line in this race, backing Kobach. Kobach, of course, was the chair of Trump's ill-fated Commission on Voter Fraud that was disbanded among a slew of legal and ethical issues. And, the fact that there's no evidence that voter fraud is actually a problem in American politics. Trump also endorsed Kobach over the advice of his aides, who noted how unusual it is for a sitting president to make a primary endorsement against a sitting governor from his own party, as well as legitimate concerns that Kobach is far more beatable in November than Collier. But in the Democratic primary for governor of Michigan, it was the influence of the far left being tested, a test it failed. Gretchen Whitmer easily winning the Democratic nomination last night, gaining more than half the vote. Her main opponent, Abdul El-Sayed, was backed by both Bernie Sanders and by Queens' Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, both of whom came barnstorming through Michigan in support of El-Sayed. But the momentum of the Democratic far left stopped short in Michigan again last night, Rich, after El-Sayed's 20-point loss.
I'm going to speak to Rick Klein, the ABC political director, in a little bit to get the sense on the Hill about how nervous Republicans are right now. Your sense is they should be, right? Especially after what we saw in Ohio.
They should be very nervous, very nervous. And in fact, if Democrats perform better in November than they've been performing in the special elections, this wave could get even bigger in our region and could topple people like Lee Zeldin in the 1st District. Peter King might not be out of the woods. Dan Donovan in Staten Island. Even Chris Smith, who seems to be safe in New Jersey's 4th District, could theoretically face closer than expected challenges or potentially lose if this trend continues. And keep in mind, we're likely to see bigger turnout disparities for Democrats in November than we saw in these special elections going through.
And all the trend lines, all the storylines that we're talking about, whether it's the investigation that's coming out, 2 books that are going to be coming out, critical of the president, the Woodward book and the Omarosa thing, there's not good news on the horizon right now that's expected to drop before November for this president. So you would think the time or the clock is not the friend of Republicans.
You might get better economic news between now and November that helps the president, or you might get some positive developments in the foreign affairs that helps the president. But no, there doesn't seem to be anything on the horizon that would point directly towards that.
And if you're Bernie Sanders, or if you're that part of the wing who said, I'm angry, I'm not taking it anymore, I'm not going to go along to get along Democrats, how big a deal is Michigan?
I think Michigan is a big deal because they invested their personalities, they invested their time and money from these networks around the country.
It didn't come close.
It did not absolutely come close. I think the real lesson here for the Sanders wing is what kind of relationship do they have after these primaries. Al-Sayed was very deferential and supported the nominee fully. I'd like to see, and Democrats would hope to see Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez and others encouraging the party to come together in November, regardless of these splits. It hurt the party in 2016. It can't hurt the party this time.
So that's on the national side. There were 2 congresspeople from our area that were in the news, and not for the same reasons. Both have dates in court. One got some good news, the other definitely not the same. Andrew, who are we talking about?
Yeah,
here?
Let's start with that latter one, Rich. It is Buffalo area Republican Congressman Chris Collins, who represents New York's 27th district. He was arrested this morning and charged with insider trading and lying to the FBI. He has already pleaded not guilty. Prosecutors say it's connected to a pharmaceutical company of which Collins was on the board. That company was working on a drug to treat multiple sclerosis when company officials told Collins their drug failed a major test. He then allegedly told his son to sell a bunch of their stock.
In total, the conspirators used the inside information to avoid over $750,000 in losses. But Congressman Collins couldn't keep his crime a secret forever. The FBI asked to interview him, and instead of telling the truth, he lied.
Lying to the FBI sounds familiar. The other congressman in the news and in court was Sean Patrick Maloney, the Democrat who represents Rockland and Westchester's 18th district. His congressional challenger dropped his objection to Maloney's run for state attorney general, clearing the way for Maloney to appear on that ballot. Maloney's already been renominated to run for Congress. If he wins the primary for AG or loses an upcoming court case, the party will have to pick a new nominee for Congress. But Maloney came out swinging, releasing this ad for AG just hours after the court cleared his candidacy.
This is a fight there's just no running from.
I feel like there's a group of men led by Donald Trump who have shown up at the front yard and they're getting ready to tear this house apart. And I'm going to stand in the hallway with a baseball bat because I don't have any choice. My kids are upstairs asleep.
Pretty powerful ad, and he did not waste any time in getting that out there. Clearly it was ready, just waiting for his approval to get on the ballot.
We're going to have a former federal prosecutor here shortly. I'll talk about Collins and corruption. That one wasn't a close call here. Everybody knows that's a no-no. You don't use your office, basically, of Congress here to go ahead and basically make some short some stocks here that you know are going to go in the toilet.
Couple of notes on that. Collins was the first person in Congress to endorse Trump and has been strongly aligned with Trump.
In fact, at the convention, he was the guy who introduced the president, right?
The other thing is that apparently the timing of this all happened, like the report on that drug, happened during the congressional picnic at the White House last year. So Collins is actually seen during the time when the prosecutors say he was talking to his son about selling the stock. There's video of him on the cell phone.
I saw that clip. He doesn't look too happy.
No.
Now we talk about Sean Patrick Maloney, and he's a good friend to the show. Clearly, he's double dipping. Okay, he wants to be the next Attorney General in New York, and on the same end, if that doesn't work out, he wants to be keep his job as a congressman in the Hudson Valley. Okay, what did the court say? And is he out of the woods yet? Can he really double dip?
The court really didn't rule. It was that the objection for him being on the ballot in the Attorney General's race was removed. That cleared the way for him to be placed on the ballot. His challenger in the 18th district is still challenging his ability to appear on both ballots at the same time. So there is a court hearing that's scheduled, and he could theoretically be ejected from representing the Democratic Party in the 18th district, at which point local party leaders would have to scramble to find somebody to replace him on the ballot.
So let's be clear. In about 5 weeks, New Yorkers, just under it, New Yorkers are going to vote.
Yeah.
And they're going to decide here who they want to, in the
September 13th,
exactly, in the
Thursday.
primary, who they want to pick. He's not the odds-on favorite right now to become the Attorney General in New York.
No.
Tish James is. Theoretically, that would be enough time for him to do mea culpas locally if he doesn't get it and still keep his seat. But what happens if he gets the nomination?
If he gets the nomination, then, well, first of all, he becomes the likely next Attorney General of the state of New York. But I believe the Westchester and Rockland County Democratic parties would get together and pick somebody to nominate. There would not be a primary. There wouldn't be enough time. The question is, who would that be? Because Democrats do not have the deepest bench in Rockland County. That district is mostly Rockland County with just a little bit of Westchester.
Literally, they'd have 6 weeks to introduce somebody, pick somebody, introduce somebody, and then, have the idea that the guy would actually campaign and do the rest.
They would have to pick somebody who's got something of a public profile already, an elected official, one would think, unless there's a celebrity on the...
I'm sure some people are thinking about the residency requirements right now.
The only positive for them right now is that the Republican opponent in the 18th is not particularly well known. He hasn't really established his personality as well at this point either. So, and one more thing. Let's say Maloney doesn't make it to the AG ballot and runs for re-election. This is going to make it a lot more difficult for him to win re-election. It's going to be a huge campaign issue in the 18th.
By the way, that is not a slam dunk district. Over the years, he beat a Republican to get the job. So my point is, he's just put a seat in play no matter what, however you look at it, to your point. All right. Finally, I want to look at a couple poll numbers here. And to me, at least, they shock the hell out of me. Maybe they shouldn't, because it takes quite a bit to shock us anymore in this political climate. So here's where we go here. When we take a look at the numbers and as to what the public looks here, and this is, by the way, Ipsos is a credible polling agency, Andrew. Here is the question posed. Should the president have the authority to close news outlets engaged in bad behavior? Now, this is Republicans who answered this question. A plurality say yes. They didn't say what is bad behavior. Basically, it's up to the president to decide, and obviously he thinks everybody in the fourth estate, maybe with the exception of Fox, is an enemy of the people. Then, should the president close specific outlets, including CNN, the Washington Post, and the New York Times? When that was more specific, then the poll went the other way. Try and make sense of that one. But to me, my God, I have a conversation with Chrissy Todd Whitman where we talk about this and her concerns as a fellow Republican about the president and that he's not suitable for office. But my point that if he was less of a bull in a china shop and he was more smooth about how he went about doing things, do you imagine conceivably if there was a president who was more nuanced than this one, the possibility of us and the government and the type of democracy that we enjoy, how quickly things could change?
Think about it beyond that. If he was able to make himself more appealing beyond his base, imagine the things that he could convince the American people to do on policy, on international relations, or on just power, or what we would consider Machiavellian moves like penalizing news outlets. Or there's a similar poll last year where somewhere in the 40% range of Republicans said if the president suggested delaying the 2020 elections because they weren't safe, we'd be okay with doing that.
And by the way, what kind of a country is that? That's a dictatorship.
Right. But exactly what we're talking about here. When the Trump era began, Republicans made up about 28% of the voting population. Now they're about 26 or 25. So it's a smaller, self-selecting group of Republicans, or people who identify as Republicans. Of that group, about half of them seem willing to follow this president down to any blind alley or any policy pattern that he wants to go through.
Fair enough.
So we're looking at about 12, 13% of the population.
Independents that don't recognize themselves as Republicans, but still nonetheless voted for this president, I'm not sure what percentage of them wouldn't have voted in the affirmative on those polls either.
One would think that they'd be more likely to vote for him than follow him in a path towards hell, which is what I would liken these sorts of things to be. I mean,
all right.
You keep your fingers crossed and hope that that's the way it goes.
Still, my God. All right, Andrew, thank you very much. When we come back, a former federal prosecutor will join me on set to take a closer look at the Mueller probe, the Manafort trial ongoing, and we have big news on both, including the president's own attorneys trying to negotiate terms for him with an interview with Bob Mueller, and they do it on a live radio program. Stay with us.